Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to an extra-long 2-hour Best of Dogman edition of Scary Stories. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. This time we've got a really scary all-new Dogman story, and we've got the entire creepy little talking doll saga complete in this one show. It's the Best of Dogman, Summer 2020. I was about to start putting this episode together and we received a recurring payment from this one particular person. Then I realized they've been a member for a long time and I don't think I've ever thanked them on the show at all. So that's why today's executive producer is Stell Cordova. Her name's Stell Cordova, hotter than a supernova. All that she does well, 'cause she's Cordova. First name, Stell. Thank you, Stell Cordova. We couldn't do the show without your kind contributions. If you would like to become an executive producer like Stell Cordova, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click the join link under this here video. In either case, within 24 hours or less, you will have links in your possession to over 9 hours of scary, uncensored Dogman stories, all to something for this channel. And speaking of something, this first story sure is something. Imagine camping in a location that affords you the rare privilege of observing a family of wolves from what you hope is a safe distance. Then imagine that things get weird when you witness the wolf that walked. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story about a time that I witnessed a very rare sight. 2 wolf families coming into conflict at the edges of their territory. But the sight became a true once-in-a-lifetime moment when one of the wolves stood up and revealed himself to be some sort of dogman. I was in the Gwynn State Forest area in northern Michigan, between Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. It's a really beautiful place to get away to nature, and that's what I was doing. I had already spent over a week out camping and hiking randomly through the place, and I was contemplating whether I wanted to spend my second and final week of vacation doing the same. My mind was starting to shift toward heading back home for a few days of sleeping and video games before I had to get back to work. If I went straight from hiking to the office, I might fall asleep at my desk the first few days back. Maybe if I did it just right, nobody would even know I was back home, so I could just order in delivery and avoid all responsibility for a little while. I love it out in nature, but it's a lot of work, that's all. These were the kinds of thoughts going through my head that night. I think it was Sunday night or Monday, I'm not sure. This was a few years back. My mind was lost in thinking about how comfortable my couch would feel and wondering if my year of free HBO had run out yet. Then nature decided I should be paying attention to something else instead. A wolf's howl erupted so loudly and so nearby that I leaped to a standing position in fright. I had been toasting a marshmallow on a stick. It probably would have been my 6th or 7th of the night. I was on a blissful sugar high that had suddenly turned, in 2 seconds flat, into a panicked state in which I found myself shaking all over. I had never been that close before to a sound like that. Before I could locate the source of the howl with my eyes, I heard a few more higher-pitched howls greet it, coming from the same direction. That was when the motion through the trees attracted my gaze, and I saw them. An entire family of wolves. There were 2 very, very large ones, and at least 4, possibly 5 smaller ones, which were all around the same smaller size. I had never seen such a thing before. It was a brightly moonlit night, and I had a clear angle on them. It was truly remarkable. They had not noticed me, as they seemed preoccupied with something outside of my line of vision. Their howls were pathetic, sounding almost as though they were under attack, but I could see them, and nobody was harming them. Still, they milled about amongst themselves, seemingly terrified of something. What was it that they were looking at? I decided I'd better put out my campfire and get ready to zip myself up inside my tent. After getting the fire put out, I changed my mind and decided to risk giving myself away by walking around the back of my tent and closer to those wolves. I felt as though if I were about 15 or 20 feet closer and off to my left, I might be able to see what it was that the wolves were all looking at and whimpering. I came around a bush, leaning my head to the side and trying to see past the various obstacles. I finally came to a point where I could see something that really stunned me. But the thing that I saw issued a loud, deep howl, which slammed me in the chest with its powerful sound before I could even react to what I had just seen. I was looking at a wolf so freakishly large that I briefly felt insane. I have since looked them up on the internet, and it turns out that wolves that size are native to Alaska. I've seen video of them since, but on that night, I just thought I was seeing something impossible. A wolf the size of a horse. My knees turned to jelly, and I managed not to hurt myself as I collapsed to the ground in stunned surprise. What the heck was I looking at? Was this the leader of their clan or something? So, as I fell to my knees and butt on the grass, the giant wolf did the opposite. He stood up and up and up, rising to some ridiculous height, standing bipedally like King Kong with a dog head, and barking viciously at the other wolves I had thought were its family. If those wolves were this giant's relatives, I think they had just been disowned. The normal-sized family of wolves took off in a wild panic, slamming into trees and getting tangled in vines as they whined in such absolute horror that you would have thought you were hearing them being torn asunder. And judging by the dust and flying leaves I was witnessing, the majority of the wolves were heading blindly and maniacally in my direction. I tore back to my tent, zipping myself in as one of the younger wolves ran directly into it, then somersaulted gracelessly over it, landing on its side and squealing in pain before resuming its mad egress. It was the last place in the world I wanted to be at that moment, but that's where I was, sitting in the dark and shivering. I listened as the wolf family fled in the distance. Then I broke down and wept a little, trying to stay as silent as I could manage in case there were any other predatory creatures around. It seemed silent, though, so I was pretty certain that the big upright canine had left, chasing the normal-sized ones off of his turf. That must have been a turf battle, and I would say that the giant lone wolf won. Unless he wasn't a lone wolf. Unless he had left his own clan behind. Or maybe that's who he was defending. Or maybe he was a she and it was a mother wolf defending her pups. I wanted to try to go to sleep, but I wanted to convince myself I was relatively safe before trying to do that. After a while, I got tired enough that I just didn't care anymore, so I got in my sleeping bag and tried to sleep. I had decided by then that I was definitely going to go back home in the morning. As I lay there trying to consciously slow my breathing, I found I was too panicked to sleep. I didn't feel safe there any longer, but I was safer sleeping inside the tent than outside trying to move, and I knew it. As I started to begin to finally drift off, I thought I felt my phone vibrating, but only for a second. Then it happened again, and I grabbed the phone, which was dark and not vibrating at all. But the next time it happened, it came with noises from outside, and I understood that I was hearing the sound of something very big walking my way. To be honest, at first I thought it was something large and hooved, but as it drew closer, it sure sounded as though it were walking on 2 feet, just like that large dogman I had seen scare the wolf family away. That really alarmed me because wolves, whether large or small, are known for their stealth and quiet as they move. They don't have loud footsteps unless they're walking on a hard floor and you can hear their nails. No matter how heavy the beast was, these footsteps sounded heavier. I kind of wondered if it might be Bigfoot. But then the sniffing began, and a huge dog nose pushed into the tent, moving all around, smelling it up and down. This was either the monster I had seen earlier or another bipedal dog man from his clan. It was going to definitely smell me as I had put the tent up. Was it going to try to get inside though? Or was it going to just satisfy its curiosity and move on? I heard it growl a few times briefly when it smelled something that made it angry. Then, it would keep sniffing to the next part of the tent, jumping all around as though it were reading a fascinating magazine or something. Do they still have magazines? Hopefully you know what I mean. At some length, the giant wolf thing backed off, whining sadly and seeming to fret. It wanted to get in, or maybe it wanted me to go out. I would have preferred neither. I remember the dogman pushing one long claw into the tent, and it pushed in around a foot. The end of that claw looked sharp enough to tear the tent, and I think if it had pushed a little further or a little harder, it might have. Instead, it withdrew and ran away, barking mournfully. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, as you can imagine, I'm sure. I kept hearing things, or at least one thing, moving around out there, but nobody else came around sniffing at me. I left as soon as that sun was up in the morning. I used to say I would never go back there, but I definitely would, just not alone. Although it was the most horrible thing that ever happened to me when it occurred, I have to say things have sucked way worse since then, to be honest. I kind of think sometimes that I almost wish I really could get a second chance to see the wolf that walked. We got a couple of pretty creepy tales for you today, but before we get to that, I'd like to point out that today's show is executive produced by Adam Friday. Talking about that guy Adam Friday, he's the kind of guy who makes my day. You know, he's a sir and not a madam, because we're talking about Mr. Friday, Adam. Thank you, Adam. We couldn't do it without you, quite literally. If you would like to become as respected and looked up to as the great Adam Friday, then just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click the join button underneath any of our YouTube videos. And now, I want to warn you about our first story. It's about a place that you should probably never go. People go there and invisible things are said to follow them back home. Google Street View is even too scared to drive down this road. It's just that freaky over there. So if you feel brave and ready, then we'll begin telling you the horrifying and allegedly true tale of the Dice Road Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. There is a spooky road in Missouri that is very famous here locally, but not quite as famous outside of the state. It's known for phenomena that local law enforcement spent years trying to investigate and solve way back in the 1970s. At the time, the phenomena was thought to be ghosts or demons or witchcraft. but in some ways, it was just like stuff that gets reported from dogmen and Bigfoot habituations. It was mainly banging that seemed to be coming from outside the house. It sounded like some lunatic banging hard on the walls, trying to drive the people inside crazy. It reached the point where some cops slept inside the house, while others surrounded it from all sides outside. When banging would happen, the officers outside saw nothing at all. That's far from the only location on Dice Road thought to be haunted, though. These hauntings are not polite ones. They're violent hauntings, and they tend to ruin the lives of the humans forced to endure them. Sometimes investigators found that the thing would follow them home and ring their doorbell at 3 o'clock in the morning just to say hello. To add to the mystery of that inexplicable pathway, Dice Road does not appear in Google Street View. You can see one of the haunted houses as it's on the corner of North Chapin Road, which is on Street View. Other than that, you're limited to satellite, or you can get in a car and drive to the creepy place yourself. That's what me and my family did the other night. We watched a documentary online about the one house, and then sometime after 11, 5 of us decided to hop in my car and take a drive up there from where we live outside of Toledo. It's about a 2 or 3 hour drive each way, but none of us had work the next day, and we were bored. We decided we'd get breakfast somewhere on the way back, even if we had to eat it in the car. Then we could sleep all the following day. I remember feeling excited about it since we really haven't done a single fun thing all year because of the unending stupidity. We left home feeling all brave, but when we were actually outside in the dark night, we started to realize this wasn't a video we were watching on a screen any longer. This was getting more and more real. My brother and sister were both competing to see who could find a street view image of the house faster on their phones, when they both realized at once what I told you before. Dice Road is not on Google Street View. Like I said, we could get a blurry side view of the one house, but I think we were only getting ourselves more and more spooked out. As we realized we were getting closer, we started to have second thoughts about the idea of driving past someone's private home, especially since it was already almost midnight when we left, and we had been driving a bit before we got anywhere close to there. Then, also, one of my sisters was saying we might only bring something home with us, and that it really wasn't worth it. Somewhere about midway there, our plan had changed to us driving past the Dice Road Cemetery. That is also supposed to be haunted, apparently by a female spirit. It sounded scary, but not like end your life kind of scary. Plus, a female spirit sounded downright friendly compared to the kind of things that the other Dice Road entities were supposed to be like. When we finally got to the cemetery, I slowed the car down, but everyone was yelling at me to pull off the road and park. Against my better judgment, I caved into the mob and did as they asked. And so there we were, parked on the grass alongside Dice Road, looking over at the old cemetery. I really didn't want to be there. I was all for driving past the place, but turning the engine off just seemed like a horrible idea. Windows were rolled down. People wanted to hear the night. They wanted to smell it, to be a part of it. They wanted to be in this place where ghosts were said to live more openly than anywhere else in the United States of America. And then, the tallest bear I ever saw burst out of the bushes, running on its hind legs toward our car, faster than I'd ever seen a bear move in my lifetime. "Crazy bear," I shouted, telling people to roll up the windows and lock the doors, but before I could finish what I was saying, that crazy bear was barking at us and slamming his body heavily into the passenger seat door. Everyone made a whoa sound as the wheels on that side of the car actually lifted off the ground upon impact from the huge and incredibly muscular beast thing. I turned the key in the ignition as I turned my head to see that the bear had a face like an all-black German shepherd. I could see it pretty clearly because the streetlight was illuminating the scene. We were being attacked not by a black bear at all, but instead by an all-black German shepherd 6 feet tall or taller that knew how to walk on its hind legs. My brother said it was a dogman and that I should go. Then he started choking and coughing. Everyone else was crying and someone was shoving me on the shoulders to get me to drive. I looked at the thing, and it did not look supernatural. It did not have glowing eyes. It did have a massive frame and looked strong enough to overturn the car with all of us in it if I didn't get going. I told them to take a picture of it, and they all fumbled for their phones as I put my foot down slowly on the gas. Every atom in me wanted to slam my foot down, but I knew that if I tried to accelerate that car too quickly, that old engine was just going to conk out. Everyone's anxiety grew in direct proportion to their shouting and complaining at me because as we began to slowly roll back onto the old dice road, that dogman trotted alongside, slamming the windows and doors of my car as though it wanted to get in at us. I risked accelerating faster than normal, begging my old car to please be nice to me just this one time. I got the car up to 20, up to 30. I felt inside how good it would feel once we were away from the dogman and safe again. I did that because a nice old lady once told me that was God's favorite way to hear our prayers. He wanted to know what would make us feel great. So if we imagine that wonderful feeling of relief or happiness, or whatever it was that you lacked in your present situation, it would be like a spotlight shining up at him, and he would notice it right away. I imagined us being away from that dogman, then opened my eyes, and the speedometer was up to 35 miles an hour and climbing. Nobody had calmed down or stopped screaming yet, though, so my prayer must not have been fully granted yet. I knew that it would be, though, as I had felt the wonderful feeling of it being granted while I was praying. I knew that it was like a flower bud, and it was just waiting for the perfect time to bloom. We drove away as quickly as I could get my old Honda to go, and the rest of them were screaming that the thing was chasing after us. I didn't see it myself. I wouldn't look. I was watching the road, watching my speedometer, and remembering how good it was going to feel once that dogman was out of view. Something slammed hard into the driver's seat window, scaring me so much that I partially jumped out of my seat onto my brother in the passenger seat. I looked back over to see the dogman clearly running over 40 miles an hour on its hind legs, and it had just slammed the side of its fist into the driver's seat window. That was what had scared me. Rather than pulling myself up closer to that monster to grab the steering wheel, I stared in awe at what I had just mentioned to you. This dog had a fist. I could see the side of its fist right there in front of me. I wanted it to open its fist. I wanted to see what its hand looked like, since I had never seen a dog with a hand before. And then the driverless car swerved out of control, turning left suddenly and randomly. Everyone, including myself, screamed as my brother pushed my stunned form back into the driver's seat, where I managed to grab the wheel and keep us on the road, barreling forward. The car's decision to turn left had cut off the dogman, who had now lost ground to us and was behind, trying to catch up. It wasn't till I was over 50 that they told me we were getting away from him. After we got home, I looked it up, and wolves can sometimes run 40 miles an hour, so that means it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that this larger creature might have been able to run that fast, or maybe even a little bit more. I was so excited once we got away. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. As horrible as I felt looking into the face of that weird monster dog thing, That's how good it felt to know that it was already a few miles behind us, only 10 minutes later. It was like we were the great heroes of old, and we had journeyed into the land of night, returning with a tale of encountering a real-life demon. It was the hero's journey. It felt good. It felt much better than any sports team win kind of a feeling. It felt better than almost anything I've ever felt. But my brothers and sisters weren't happy about it. When I found an all-night diner, they were too scared for me to even stop the car. What if the car doesn't start up again? One asked. What if we stop here and it gives the dogman time to catch up to us? Asked another. What if it was a werewolf, not a dogman? And everyone working in that diner is a werewolf too, asked my brother, who watches way too much Twilight Zone. So we drove on until the sun came up, and they all felt safe enough for me to stop at a McDonald's drive-thru for breakfast. After the almost 6 hours of driving I had just done, I ate mine standing up outside the car just to give my butt a break. I tell you, that McDonald's, it tasted like the finest French breakfast that morning because we had just raced against a dogman and lived to tell the tale. My brothers and sisters were still upset about it, still shaken up and acting all victimized. They were annoyed at the fact that I was so happy, but this happened a few days ago and they were already bragging about it to their friends. Of course, nobody got a photo that shows anything but orange blur. It doesn't look real, it doesn't look fake, it doesn't look like anything. They got better pics of the car interior than exterior, and one of my sisters took all her pics with the flash on, with predictable results. I find that kind of interesting. The people who claim demon or ghost encounters on Dice Road have plenty of very real hard proof, including from public officials like police and fire investigators. Then here we come along and we have an encounter with something that seemed very alive and very real, and yet we have absolutely zero evidence at all. We looked the car over at breakfast and it was filthy, but that dogman hadn't made any dents and hadn't cracked any of the windows. It was extra dirty wherever he hit us though, and that to me is a testament to the fact that he must have been physical and real, not a ghost or hallucination or projection or hologram. As exciting as this was, I don't think I would ever want to take another trip to that area. As much fun as it is to get to tell people that you saw the dogman, it's still the scariest thing in the world while it's happening. There were 5 of us, but we didn't feel we were a match to that one creature. Think about that for a while before you start driving off on your own legend trip looking for the Dice Road Dogman.
Hello? Hello? No, I'm not out there. I'm down here. Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry to announce to you that your old pal Bigfoot has passed away. I accidentally pushed him into the elevator shaft and he broke both his big feet. Then the rats and I were hungry, so...
Do you hear a voice talking? I thought I heard a voice.
Don't believe him. He fell down in the elevator shaft. He's gone.
There it was again. Like someone talking over a telephone. Or on an old TV or something.
Shh, don't tell him it's me.
It's that creepy old doll in that crate over there. It must be one of those dolls where you pull the string and it talks, but there isn't anybody over there to pull the string. Hey, maybe it's haunted and I can get that guy from TV to come take him away from here in exchange for some cash.
You will not sell me. At least not yet. I have a story to tell. A story about vampires.
Yeah, kid, I don't know. Our audience only likes true stories.
Very well then. This story is true.
Very well then. You can't just decide a story is true 2 seconds before you tell it. Life doesn't work that way, dude.
Don't call me dude. I don't identify as male.
Oh, sorry. Well, how could I know?
See? You accepted me as other than male because of an arbitrary decision I made 2 seconds earlier.
So?
Why not accept that my vampire story is true for the same reason?
I'm getting a headache. Listen, Dollface, you get one try. If the audience hates you, then I'm selling you to some haunted doll collector. I don't know what I could even get for you anyway. Your mouth doesn't even move when you talk.
Very well, I shall tell my story. Before I begin, I would like to ask everyone watching this to please suggest a name for me. I need a name in order to truly possess this doll, so that I can tell you more stories. I hope that in exchange for this next tale, you consider leaving a comment with a possible name. And now for the very haunted story, which I will call
My Ex-Girlfriend, the Vampire. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm writing to tell you a true story about how a vampire ruined my life. He took my true love away from me, ruined my entire family, and left me incapable of defending or protecting myself. I've tried several times to rebuild my life, but the vampire can do strange things to your mind that make you think you're being logical when you are not in any way. I can tell that I'm already confusing you, and that's my lot in life. I used to be a professor of English literature at a prestigious university, but the vampire fell in love with my fiancée, and everything that I was intended to be, everything I was intended to do, was destroyed at his pleasure. It would be difficult to explain my family history to you, except to say that we had a tradition dating back to the early 1800s of battling and infighting with a certain other academic family. To say more than that would be saying too much. The fact that I was set to marry the favored daughter of our rival clan was a cause for celebration to many, especially on my side of the family. My relatives and ancestors all tended to be bright academicians, but not very adept at social battles. We tended to be on the receiving end of most of the smears and accusations over the years, and we stood to gain the most by this marriage. I am a very old man. I suppose the idea of marriages bringing families together may be a quaint and ancient one, but it was very real in those days, and my marriage to the woman I will merely call N mattered more to more people than any marriage I have become aware of since those days. N was beautiful in her youth, and she genuinely returned my love in a spontaneous and joyful manner. We were so very happy, and then one day, we met the vampire. We were together when it happened. We were picnicking in Central Park. He looked like a man of society, and I noticed him from very far off. I want to say that something about his eyes were mesmerizing, but he was wearing little round sunglasses that day, and I couldn't see his eyes at all. Nevertheless, I couldn't take my eyes off of them either. He walked all the way across the lawn and up to my intended bride. He began speaking to her in a familiar way, ignoring my presence entirely. I should have risen and struck the interloper. I had every right to do so in the custom of the time. Instead, for some reason, I remained down on the blanket, smiling idiotically up at the strange gentleman. He reached out his hand, and N offered hers in return. He helped her stand, and the two of them spoke quietly to each other, far too quietly for me to understand what they were saying. They looked so far up in the sky, and they looked so beautiful together. I could do nothing but smile at them and remain seated ineffectually. Eventually, the gentleman departed, and I called after him, thanking him for his visit. For some inexplicable reason, I gushed about what a fine gentleman he was and how honored we should be by his attention. It was like I was his wingman, not his rival. N ordered me to be quiet after a while. She got sick of my praise of this man who was trying to steal her away from me. My spineless behavior sickened her. It sickened my entire family as well. They lectured me about being a man and standing up for myself, and I felt ashamed for having behaved the way I had. I did not yet understand that my rival was not a gentleman at all, but was instead a vampire. The next time I had a date with N, she insisted on meeting me at the restaurant. In those days, the gentleman would call on the lady and visit with her parents for a while before the date began, so I was somewhat shocked by her request. I lacked the backbone to argue with her, though, and I showed up at the time she had instructed me to. When the waiter guided me to the table, I was stunned to see that the vampire was already there. He was sitting at my place, in my seat, at my table, holding hands with my fiancée. All of the rage inside me boiled over. I had never felt so angry before in my life. I would certainly end this person now in front of everyone there at that restaurant. I had never felt so furious. That is why I don't understand why I walked up, smiling, and apologized for intruding on the two of them. The vampire started announcing what the two of them were going to have for dinner when my fiancée giggled and pointed out that I was not the waiter. Looking up, that devil thing smirked in recognition. "Ah, yes," he intoned. "You're the spelling teacher who kept my N content until my arrival." I felt such deep gratitude that he remembered me. It overruled whatever it was that I had been angry about. What a fine gentleman. N would be crazy not to dump me for him. I really felt that way in that moment. The next day, the official announcement of their impending wedding came in the newspaper. I felt such a deep sense of failure and loss, and my family made it far worse for me, almost entirely disowning me and disinheriting as well. I became the most loathed man in either family, and the vampire. He essentially became the new patriarch of N's. When the vampire was said to have passed on, Anne hired me as a servant to work inside her house. She trusted me implicitly, which at the time I took as a compliment. It was no such thing. She was just aware that I was under control, that's all. The vampire had never passed on. He had just moved behind the scenes, out of the spotlight. Apparently, when you live forever, you have to periodically fake your own passing. Why, my N will have to do the same thing sooner or later herself. She's beginning to get too old to be recognizable as a human anymore, and sooner or later, her secret will get out. She's already informed me that I am being let go due to my failing health. She's not giving me any pension, and I'm left to fend for myself. I'm very old, and very nearly on my deathbed. I will pass on in poverty and sadness, but she will live on. Each generation, she will use her vampire connections to become more and more powerful. Even now, she heads one house of the government in a once powerful and free nation. She's involved in auctioning off said country at a discount to a larger and more powerful dictatorship, joined in her effort by an entire social class full of bloodsuckers, just like my ex-girlfriend, the vampire.
Well, what do you think? I told you the story would be true.
Well, it certainly got the ring of truth to it, Dollface, I'll admit that. The jury's still out, though. If the viewers like you, you get a second chance. If they don't like you, then forget it, buddy. Or, lady, whichever it is. At any rate, do you folks out there have a name for our creepy little thing? If so, please leave your suggestion in the comments. We'll be back next time with more Dogman stories. Hope to see you then. Today we've got a really scary and allegedly true all-new Dogman story. But first I want to tell you about a guy named Hallex. He's our newest executive producer, Alexandri Hersier. Alexander. His name rhymes with salamander. Politicians gerrymander. So now let's all take a gander at Alex. No, seriously, he told me it's pronounced Alex or Alexander. I was just having some fun. Alex donated during our premiere on Friday, so I thought I would give him access to our secret uncensored scary stories and name him an executive producer to say thanks. If you would like to be an executive producer here at Scary Stories NYC, there are 3 different ways you can do it. You can donate to us directly in any amount you wish by sending it to paypal.me/PeterBernard209, or you can join our handy dandy PayPal monthly club at very affordable levels at peterbernard.com, or you can join the channel through the join link under each of our videos. I may be reworking the join membership soon, as a lot of that is under YouTube's control and out of mine. Once I figure out what my options are, I'll make an announcement, but I'm waiting to hear back from YouTube, so let's forget about that for now and get to the fun stuff. The first story we have tonight was sent into us from Tennessee. We've gotten other Dogman stories from that area, in fact very close to the same area he claims this took place in, and he calls this story, I Saw the Dixon Dogman, or Werewolf on the Way to Walmart. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I recently had a run-in with the freakiest thing I'd ever seen. A dog that was standing up as though he were a human being. Or maybe that's not right. Maybe it was some kind of a hairy man with a dog head. I'm not really sure what you would call it if we didn't already have the word dogman. But I didn't think it was a dogman at first when I saw it because, to be honest, I didn't really believe that dogman was an actual thing. So what happened was that I was driving up to the Walmart Supercenter in Dixon, Tennessee, and I was going along Cowan Road heading north. It was still light out, but it was getting dark. I was in a bit of a rush because I wasn't sure what time they were open till on that day. You can't really rely on what it says online anymore. Everything seems to change day to day. So I was driving, let's say, right at the edge of the speed limit so as not to incriminate myself. Cowan Road is tree-lined on both sides, and to the left, the land is a lot higher. What I mean to say is there's a steep climb there on the left if you want to enter the woods from there. I would expect that if someone were coming out from that direction that I would see them coming down that very steep incline from some distance. That's why I was so completely taken by surprise when suddenly there was that inexplicable man creature I told you about walking out onto the road in front of me. It shouldn't have been there. And I don't just mean because science says it doesn't exist. I mean because it shouldn't have been able to just appear like that. I should have seen it coming. I should have seen it come down that hill. Unless it was hiding behind something and waiting for me, which I suppose is possible, but even creepier. Now is when I should go into more detail about what exactly I was looking at. It was kind of like a Chewbacca-looking guy. Long wavy fur like that, and an almost orange-colored brown shade. It really did look like a very tall man, and I remember the fur being long enough that it waved all around when he would move and when the breeze blew it. The only thing was this Chewbacca was a dog, or at least it was dog-headed. Well, I swerved to my right to avoid hitting the fella, but it didn't seem as though he minded either way, because he just stood there, watching me. I found myself off the side of the road in this little drain there just before a tree-covered hill. My car's rear was up in the air, and I was facing downward. The engine had stalled out, but I was uninjured. I looked to my left to see if Chewbacca was still there, and it felt like someone shot me with adrenaline when I saw him walking over to me with a curious dog look on his head. My first weird impulse was to get out of the car. I don't know why. I opened the door before I realized that was a stupid thing to do and tried to close it again right away. The dog-headed ape thing leaped over, curious, and tried to pull the car back open as I pulled it shut again. It hadn't been open far enough for me to get off a good slam, so the door was only partially latched shut. Do you know what I mean? When you don't shut the door right, so you open it to shut it again? Only this time, there was a monster dog on the other side of that door, so I couldn't risk opening it up again. The dog seemed to have hands because it got a good hard grip on the handle to the car door and tried to pull it open. It was loose, but not loose enough to open. I was screaming at this point in fear like a crazy person. I didn't really know what to do, even though it was obvious what I needed to do. Restart my engine, then pull the car back out of the ditch, then drive around Chewbacca the Dogman, and continue on to Walmart. In spite of the fact that there was an allegedly unreal cryptid outside my door, my list of things to do was really still very mundane and ordinary. When I got the engine to start, the creature jumped up a bit and backed away. As I pulled backward the first time, I didn't give it enough gas and I ended up sliding back into the hole. Heading back out a second time, I made it, and this seemed to enrage the dogman, who placed both his front paws, or hands, or whatever they were, on my front hood directly over the engine. That metal must have been very hot to the touch because the dogman recoiled in pain and held his hands or paws out in front of him as though he didn't understand what had just happened. I took the opportunity to pull back onto the road, which I was now parallel to traffic on. I had to pull the car out of reverse, then make a left turn, and my ordeal would be over. The dogman part, the Walmart part, was yet to begin. The trouble was that as I pulled forward and to the left, hoping to drive away from this scene as though nothing had ever happened, that dogman climbed up out of the hole, and he was howling. He seemed intent on blocking my path, and I understood that if I did not get out of there faster than planned, I was going to get blocked in by the creature all over again. I floored the gas pedal, something I would not normally do because I'm not a stunt driver. The dogman lurched forward, leaping for my passenger seat car door, and it looked like he was gonna make it too. I remember shouting, "Whoa," and turning as sharply as I could, and that dogman managed to make contact with the car, but he was not able to hold on, and I sped away, screaming curses and insults at him out of relief. I watched him as I drove away, but he was too busy picking himself up and dusting himself off to come after me. I called that dogman every name in the Dirty Names book, and I made up a few new ones just for him too. I was celebrating getting away, but at the same time, I kept looking over my shoulder to see if he was following, and looking all around to see if there were any more of those things. I took Route 46 back, even though it takes me a little out of my way. It also usually has more traffic, and I mainly wanted to stay on roads where I could see other cars. No more lonely, pretty country highways for me that night. If that dogman was already out at dusk, who knows what was out and hungry when it was pitch black on my drive home. I had heard rumors that there's a dogman haunting Dixon, and now I've seen proof with my own eyes, because I saw the Dixon Dogman. Dogman and Granite. What's the connection? Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a question for you that I bet you've never asked yourself. What is the connection between Dogman and Granite Rock, and why is it being covered up? I don't mean to say that Dogman is the only strange thing associated with granite boulders, as in some cultures it's believed that spirits live inside them. Granite fields loom large in the research of David Paulides, so why all the hush-hush on the Dogman connection? Maybe this all seems like a bigger deal to me because I live in Graniteville. There are a few Granitevilles in this country, but I live in Graniteville, South Carolina. Unlike such places as Graniteville, Vermont, we don't actually have a granite quarry here. It was named Graniteville because the man who built the town in the mid-1800s used blue granite to construct all the buildings. Everywhere you go, the town resonates with granite's vibration, even to this day. Now, just as granite is not only associated with Dogman but with other strange phenomena as well, Dogman is not only associated with granite but with other interesting things such as graveyards and cemeteries. And so it shouldn't seem like a coincidence that my sighting of a Dogman took place outside the Graniteville Cemetery along Gregg Highway. My sister and I were driving past the cemetery at night the other evening, and we both said the same thing we say every time that we pass any cemetery, which is, people are dying to get in there. It's a joke that our uncle told when we drove past the cemetery in the car as kids, and so we repeat it every single time if we're together. It's just a family in-joke, But this time we didn't get to laugh at our cleverness because as soon as we both said the line, I saw the smile drop from my sister's face, and I saw her eyes dart out onto the highway. She started to point to something in front of us, and I looked over to see, I kid you not, a 10 or 11 foot tall hairy monster with the head of some kind of prehistoric dog. Like the head itself was bigger than any of the pet dogs I've ever had. This was the dinosaur of dogs, and it walked on its hind legs like some kind of Tyrannosaurus Rex. This was the Dogosaurus Rex, that's what I say. I slammed on the brakes and we skidded to a halt about 10 or 12 feet away from the huge thing, and it didn't even react or even flinch. We were close enough to it that my car smelled like the zoo, but it didn't even seem to feel that we were worth acknowledging in the least. It was large enough and close enough that I couldn't see the top of its head through the windshield as it passed. It was close enough that I could see the vermin crawling through its fur. Judging by the way it was facing and the direction it was walking, it seemed that this Dogman had just come out of the woods to our left and was proceeding to walk directly into the cemetery to our right. I yelled at my sister to take a picture, but she said it was too dark for her phone. She has an iPhone. It takes much better pictures than my old Android. I wish she would have at least tried. I mean, you never know. She might have gotten something. We sat there on the road, just watching as the creature kept walking off in the distance. I could see it had triangular ears as I viewed it from behind. It was hunched over as it walked bipedally, its tail, torso, and head all held out parallel to the ground. It was balanced over two massive tree trunk hind legs, and it walked very steadily, neither in a rush or not. It was gonna get there when it got there. That's what it looked like. You can't start the party without the Dogman, so I'm not rushing. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. I mean, it never looked at us for one split second. It was as though it didn't even see us at all. As the monster walked deeper and deeper into the cemetery filled with granite headstones, I finally couldn't see it anymore. I wasn't sure if it had walked into darkness or if it had faded out of existence, and I actually opened my car door and got out to see more clearly. I couldn't see the Dogman anymore anywhere, but again, I don't know that it wasn't just hiding in shadow. It sure did seem to just fade out of existence to me, and my sister thought so too, but neither of us could really state that as a fact for certain. It might have just walked far enough away that we couldn't see it in the dark of night any longer. Either way, headlights approached us from behind, and I hopped back into that car and got us moving before we got rear-ended. As we drove the rest of the way, both my sister and I were talking very excitedly about what we had seen. We both wondered out loud if what we saw was actually there in our time, or if we were looking back and smelling back into prehistoric times, or forward to a post-apocalyptic future. She has distanced herself from this theory in the days since then, but in the excitement of the moment, that was her first impression as well as mine. The way the creature never noticed us there. Maybe we weren't there when it actually walked by. Maybe we only saw and smelled a kind of reflection or replay of something that happened there a long time ago. And that brings me full circle back to Granite. And cemeteries too, but let's just focus on Granite. Some people refer to an idea called the stone tape theory. It's just conjecture at this point. I don't think anyone has yet devised a scientific way to test the idea out yet. So it's just this idea put forth to try to explain strange things that are unexplainable otherwise. For instance, ghost hauntings are often supposed to be replays of a traumatic past event that was somehow stored in the rock or the house where it happened. Nobody has yet figured out how to store an event in a stone or other object, and nobody has figured out how to play it back either, so we really don't know that this theory has any validity at all. However, it does boggle the mind how often the stone tape theory is used when strange things happened around Granite or quartz. We do know that quartz does have special qualities, and that's why we use it in computers and watches. It makes sense, at least to the unscientific mind, that quartz may have many other abilities that we have yet to suss out. My sister looked up an article online that said the stone tape theory is the bunk, and so now she insists that what we saw was a real living animal. I can't even talk to her about it. She freaks out and gets all emotional, but I'm telling you that back before she found out what the internet said she's allowed to think, she thought the same as I did. Her eyes told her the same thing that my eyes told me. The creature basically walked in from out of time, proceeded to ignore us as I screeched to a halt on the road in front of it, then walked right on through the cemetery until it seemed to fade out of existence off at the other end of the tombstones. So riddle me this then. Why do people tend to disappear around Granite? Why do ghosts seem to appear around Granite? Why do dogmen do the same? Is Granite either some sort of tape recorder playing the past back? Or, and I like this theory better, is Granite actually a kind of natural time machine? If we think of timelines as dimensions or realities unto themselves, then a time machine and an interdimensional vortex would seem to possibly be one and the same thing. There might be no difference between traveling through time or traveling interdimensionally. If Granite were a time machine or vortex that we didn't know how to operate, but might occasionally set off by accident, that might explain disappearances around Granite. If people or entities live in the Granite as supposed in some older cultures, maybe those creatures are the operators of the time machines or stargates. Maybe Dogman is a vision of another time or reality, or maybe Dogman is a very real flesh and blood visitor from some other time or place. No matter what the actual answer to the riddle is, I think it will turn out to have something to do with Granite and or quartz. And I also suspect that somehow in some way it may have something to do with cemeteries as well. Or else, why would the Dogman haunt them so frequently? Thank you for reading this online if you choose to. I know it's just a short sighting and a whole lot of guessing on my part, but I don't hear most of these questions being asked much, if at all. I'm not insisting that any of these ideas are true. I'm just wondering out loud, and I hope it's taken as such. I'd like to start some conversations so that if anyone can actually start to piece together real evidence of the existence of Dogman, that we can have our theories ready at hand to either be proven or disproven by what the science eventually tells us. But until or unless some evidence begins to emerge, I'm going to remain the one lone voice in the wilderness asking, Dogman and Granite, what's the connection? I am going to commit the heresy right now of naming my roommate Marie M., the executive producer of this episode, because she's been working at home here with me in a small Manhattan apartment the last few months, and she hasn't thrown me off the roof yet. Marie, she knows Frankie. Marie is who I'd like to thank ye. Thanks, Marie. And I'd like to say, I hope you have a nice birthday. This week is Marie's birthday. She's going to be turning 39 and will be old enough to drink. Happy birthday, Marie. If you would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer, you can either live with me like Marie, or you can click the join button below this video and become a channel member. Another option is to become a paid subscriber at peterbernard.com, which we'll tell you more about at the end of the show. And now, let's finally stop talking about meta stuff and get to the bleeding, beating heart of the matter. A particularly creepy and all-new Dogman story that we call I Told My Son to Invite Dogman Inside. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I met a guy at a party just before this virus thing hit that asked me if I believed in Dogman. The question made me laugh because my wife and I are parents to a young lad whose absolute favorite books are the Dogman Kids books by Dave Pilkey. I answered him that sure I believed in Dogman. I thought he was asking if I believed in a cartoon character, like do you believe in Charlie Brown and Snoopy? Yes, of course I do. We were both partying and lighthearted, and the conversation didn't really go any further than that. I had no idea that Dogman meant anything else but this cute comic character that my son loved. I had no idea that some people use the term Dogman to mean something incredibly vicious and huge, the most dangerous animal on the face of the earth. I know all about Dogman now, but my wife and I had to find out about him the hard way. So, one night, my son walked into our bedroom and woke me up from a sound sleep. He told me that Dogman was at his window. I told him he was dreaming and he should go back to sleep. He wouldn't go back in his room unless I went with him. He wanted me to see that Dogman was really there. Of course, when we got to his room, nothing was outside at all. I told him again that he had only been dreaming, but he insisted that he was awake because Dogman had been tapping on the window. It was too annoying to sleep through, so he had awakened. I asked him if he had to go to the bathroom or anything before going to bed, as usually that has always been the only reason this kid would ever wake up at night. We've heard horror stories about firstborn children robbing parents of sleep from our acquaintances, but this boy was always an angel, and he nearly raised himself in some ways. So I was bothered by him waking me up, but I figured that he's just so good I owed him one. Then, the same thing happened the next night, and the next, and the next. In February, I think he came into our room 12 or 13 different nights to complain about Dave Pilkey's Dogman come to life and standing out in the snow by his bedroom window. Actually, let me correct myself. He never said Dave Pilkey's Dogman. He just said it was Dogman. Then one time I made mention of the book series, and to my son's credit, he corrected me. He said, "No, Daddy, this is not the cartoon Dogman. This is the real Dogman." I responded, "Of course it is. The drawn one is flat. How could he even walk around out there?" And we both laughed. I still wasn't getting the point, though. I thought he was saying that this was a 3D animated version of Dave Pilkey's Dogman that he was imagining. Like when they did those weird 3D animated Bullwinkle and Natasha movies, that sort of thing. I still thought he was dreaming about seeing some version of the Dave Pilkey creation, and I had not yet even begun to consider that my son was seeing anything real outside at all. Each time he led me into the room, I saw nothing outside. To my son, that meant Dogman had walked away. To me, it meant that he didn't actually exist, and that this was just a phase that my son was going through. My wife thought the same thing. I mean, it was the natural thing for us to think. It was the only possible thing for us to think. We were certain of this because we were certain that we lived in a sane world that made sense. I don't have to tell any of you Dogman fans that we live in an insane world that is currently making up its own rules as it goes along, like a director on a Disney Star Wars movie. You don't know if the plot will remain consistent or contradict itself, and you certainly can't be assured of an ending that would satisfy anyone in any way. Without any warning, our life stopped being Bringing Up Baby and became Boris Karloff's Thriller instead. So this went on until neither of us were getting any sleep. We were constantly getting up to go check to see that Dogman was gone already. I had decided to set up a cot to sleep with our son and be there with him when he awoke and had his waking dream. Then, when I didn't see what he thought he was seeing, he would understand once and for all that it was just his imagination, and then finally we could move out of this phase of his development. At least, that's what I hoped would happen. As it turned out, my son ran into the bathroom that night while I was brushing my teeth before even going to bed, and he excitedly exclaimed that Dogman was outside the window. He asked if he could let him in, and between brushing and spitting out toothpaste, I said, "Sure." If you had asked me what one word would be the stupidest word I would ever utter, I probably never would have guessed that the word was sure. If you had asked me if I would ever tell my son it was okay to let a man-eating beast into the house, I would have answered with a different word than sure. And yet, still, here we are. I said sure when I should have said no, and when I walked into my son's room, what I saw was something that I would have thought could only exist in nightmare. No, it was not in my son's room. It was standing outside the window. But my son had just opened that window, and there was nothing between him and it except air. In that second, for me, all time froze. It was like my entire life had been leading up to this moment, and I knew that the rest of my life would either be marked by happiness or dark tragedy, depending on what was going to happen in this one particular scenario in my and my son's life. I thought of the worst case scenario and found a deep emotional reaction of sadness at the idea of something bad happening to my only child. Instinctively, I pushed that horror and sadness deep down inside me, and I quietly and steadily said, "Come here, son," in a slightly chipper, somewhat unafraid kind of a voice. I didn't look at him, though. I looked outside at the Dogman that was looking right back at me. This was not a large, friendly white dog cartoon character wearing a silly outfit. This was something that looked like it took down large prey and survived as a carnivore or a scavenger. Its eyes were hard to make out because they reflected back the room light so harshly. It made it hard for me to judge the creature's demeanor at first, but when I spoke to my son, I saw its body position shift into one that I definitely perceived as a hostile one. It reminded me of a martial arts position, and I was amazed by how much it looked like a human being, yet also looked like some kind of a feral dog at the same time. I did not see as far down as its knees. I only saw the upper part of the creature, but it had black and gray fur that was long and wavy and sparser on its belly area, which seemed to have a skin tone with a bluish tint to it, unless that was some light reflecting from my son's room that I'm unaware of. I don't think he has any blue lights in there, and I know we did not have lights outside that window on that night. The ears on the animal man were taller than any dog or wolf ears I had ever seen. They were thin and pointed, bulging out in the middle. I couldn't really compare them to any ears I had seen on other animals, really. They were basically canine, and they had pointed tufts of hair coming out on top. But they weren't like any specific kind of dog or cat or anything I'd ever seen before. The snout of the creature, once it took its defensive posture, was snarling at me, lips pulled back and teeth bared. I remember being blinded by the eyes when I would look at its head or face, though, and it was painful, so it was hard to make out details. It had arms on each side of its chest, and in that way was far more like a man than a dog. My son told me it tapped on his window with its long claws, but I don't remember specifically seeing those claws. When my son was close enough to me, I picked him up and backed out of the room, not taking my eyes off the creature for 1 second. I saw it reach inside the room, as though it were going to climb in, as I reached the hallway, and I slammed the door. My son was crying that he wanted to play with Dogman, and I asked him to shush. Shouting at my wife, I told her to grab what she could and get to the garage because we had to get out of there. She obviously didn't understand what was happening, but our son's crying woke her up and made her realize that I wasn't joking around. Then there was a long, low, howling sound that was so deep it made the walls vibrate. I could literally see our framed wedding portrait shaking on the wall as though it were going to fall down. My wife screamed and asked me what the hell that was. Our son and I answered her in unison. That was the Dogman. From the sound of it, he was still outside, but I explained to my increasingly panicked wife that our son had opened the window to let him in. I could only imagine what my wife was envisioning in her mind as I was telling her Dogman was going to get in, coupled with that supernatural-sounding howling coming from what seemed like every direction. Then, in our bathrobes, and with our son wrapped in a blanket, we made our way out of the bedroom to run to our garage. As soon as we exited our room, a loud bang came from inside my son's room, causing both me and my wife to scream in surprise and fear. My son didn't scream, though. He cheered and shouted, "Dogman's inside!" That house has a garage attached to it so that one can walk into it without having to go outside. Maybe they built it that way so you could flee the Dogman more easily. I don't know. All I do know is that we piled into that car. Our son belted in between us in front, and when I hit the button to make that garage door open, I really half expected a big, hairy, dog-headed monster to come running in at us through it. That didn't happen, but I didn't feel any safer, so I hit the gas, accelerating as quickly as I could. My fear-induced thinking was that even if the monster were there, if we were going fast enough, we would do it more harm than it could do us. I drove way too fast down our driveway, made a sharp right turn over our front lawn, and barely missed sideswiping a car parked on the other side of the street. But we were out of there, and we hadn't seen the Dogman again. Needless to say, we are not living in that house any longer. We are staying with relatives, and most of our stuff is still in there while we try to figure out what to do or where to go. While we really can't afford this, we will afford it, and we don't need to start any fundraisers or anything like that. We have enough family and enough savings that we'll get by until we can sell that place and get a new permanent home to raise our boy in. My wife and I are still kind of in shock about what happened. She didn't actually see the creature, but she has no reason to doubt me at this point. We both have become fascinated with the subject of the Dogman, for obvious reasons. From what I can gather from the available literature, most people see Dogman once and never again. The fact that my son reported seeing it literally dozens of times proves that this particular creature must be habituated to that area and seems to be drawn back by my son for whatever reason that I don't really want to think about. It seems unlikely that the creature was just passing through, and it seems very likely that as long as we stayed there, or at least as long as my son stayed there, we would all be in physical danger. I don't think moving back there is an option because we don't have eyes in the back of our heads, and nobody can protect a young child 24 hours a day. He's old enough to walk around and open the window, but he isn't really old enough yet to reason about whether that might be a wise choice or not. I never cared about kids until this little guy was born. He's so innocent. I have never felt so protective of another human being, or anything else for that matter. He matters more to me than I matter to myself. So, it doesn't matter what hardship I am put through, I need to see that he stays safe until he's old enough to care for himself. You know, I say my son is too young to reason, but how did reason help me in this case? I was reasonable on the world. Nature was... well, it was nature. Nature never promised to be reasonable. Nature does what it wants, then does the opposite just as fiercely. Nature doesn't care who you feel protective over or how you might cry if this or that happened. Well, the savage aspect of nature is that way at least. I guess when you think about it, our protective and loving feelings are natural as well. I guess we're given those feelings to use to try to balance out the world. We have kindness and generosity and forgiveness and caring for each other on the one side. And on the other side, we have meanness, we have stinginess, we have callousness, we have cruelty, and above all, on that side, we have the dogman. For generations, people have referred to hard times poetically as a wolf being at your door. What exactly, then, does the symbol of the wolf at your son's bedroom window represent? What is this new modern kind of monster that torments us? My father never warned me to look out for werewolves. I know I read online that they've always been there, but my generation never heard of them until recently. If they were always here, there seems to be more here now than ever before. Maybe there are more of them, maybe they are breeding, maybe they don't have enough competition for food or resources. Some scientists and experts say that there isn't enough there in the wild areas of America to support the known predators and cryptids such as Bigfoot. So how could the resources be so abundant that these dogmen are able to multiply to such an extent that now they're even bothering sweet young innocent boys in suburbia? Or what if, as real as that dogman was, as real as its howl was that made the picture on the wall shake, what if it still wasn't exactly real at all? What if that creature is spawned by our imagination, by our fear? What if my son manufactured him out of his dreams? What if what we saw and heard was a tulpa, a thought form given life? I feel crazy even saying that because I went back and cleaned up my son's room that the dogman had trashed a bit. It wasn't all that bad, and he seemed to have gone out the way he came in, but seeing the stuff thrown around seems to prove, to me at least, that something physical was there. Unless you consider that the same exact activity is reported by those who think that they're being haunted by a poltergeist. I suppose the moral of this story is that if your son asks you if he can let Dogman in, you don't say, sure, unless you're a complete idiot like me, because I told my son to invite Dogman inside. I'm Henry Lee Dogman, filling in for Bigfoot. I tried to call him on the phone, but nobody answered, so I came over here to his place to look for him. You can help me look later, but first I'm excited to mention that today's executive producer is Zoe KK. Zoe is a channel member, yay. Helps us keep the wolves at bay as we struggle through each day. We say our thanks to Zoe KK. Thanks, Zoe. If not for nice people like you, we wouldn't even be able to continue doing this show. If you would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like Zoe KK, just join our channel memberships by clicking the join link under our videos, or else by becoming a paid subscriber at peterbernard.com, which will explain more at the end of the show. You'll get access to over 9 hours of scary, uncensored Dogman stories that we could never show on this channel. But if you join the paid subscribers club, please give Peter up to 24 hours to see that he has to respond to you. If you're joining only for the secret videos and not actually to support us, then maybe try the channel memberships instead, since they give you instant access to the links if you're smart enough to figure out how to navigate to our community page. And no, don't ask me how to do that on a phone or a tablet. I am a dogman, and dogmen are not that great with technology. You can send us your scary stories either by email to scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by calling our Scary Stories hotline 1-804-LA-SCARY or 804-537-2279. This first story today was sent into us by email and adapted by Peter Bernard for Bigfoot to read. Since I haven't found him yet, I'll read it to you instead, and we've decided to call it The Werewolf of Willow Bend. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I seen a dog man once, although my brother says we saw the lizard man. I'll tell you what happened, and you can decide for yourself. There's a wild area between the high school's baseball fields and one of those prefab, pre-built communities in that forested place, and in that forested place flows the Swamp Creek. It can get pretty swampy in there depending on how the weather's been lately, so you've got to watch your step. In fact, I'd just advise you on not even going in there, especially since me and my brother saw that man-sized cryptid I'm about to tell you about. This place I'm talking about is a mix of country and suburbs, but we're only a half-hour drive south of Atlanta, so we're not exactly out in the boondocks. When we walked into that swampy forest on that late afternoon, though, my brother and I may as well have been entering the most primitive jungle, or even walking back in time to savage prehistory. There's one more thing I want to mention in order to clearly set the scene. It's hard to make out on maps, but there are high power lines running through that forest. There's a clear-cut path for miles and miles in either direction, so those wires can go through. They're right on the edge of that prefab town, and also right on the edge of the forest. Now, I didn't learn this until after the events I'm about to describe, but apparently those kinds of wires can emit a kind of energy that can cause people to think they're seeing things. Possibly seeing things like Dogman or Lizard Man. Then again, other people think that the wires attract the cryptids, and still others think that the vibrations sent out by the wires create some kind of interdimensional portal, which allows these things to pass over into our reality. Now, I don't know if there's anything to any of that, but I felt that it would have been dishonest to tell this story without first pointing out the proximity to these wires, which do emit extra low frequencies. Now, this happened a pretty long time ago now. I guess it would have been around the middle of August last year. We were both just goofing off, trying to stay out of our parents' line of vision so that we wouldn't be forced to do something useful with our day. To us back then, the woods behind the baseball field were our escape, and we planned on hiding out there all day. There were some places we would go to goof off that our dad would come and find us at, and there were other places that our mom knew. Heck, she still knows them. But neither of our parents liked to go into those woods. They're often muddy, And if you don't put your pants inside your socks, sometimes the ticks and fleas crawl on up to your tighty whities. But my brother and I got all that kind of thing under control, and so when we really needed to get away and have some time alone, that's where we would go. Not so much anymore, but then again, that's what this story is about. The time we saw a monster, and we stopped feeling safe and secure in that little patch of forest that the swamp creek runs through. It was on our way walking home toward the end of the afternoon when we were taken by surprise by the sudden appearance of the creature. My brother and I both agree that it seemed to be bigger than either of us, maybe about as large in frame as our father, who I think is 5'11". I apologize that we didn't see a 12-foot tall monster, but believe me, seeing anything wild that's taller than you by even an inch is a terrifying sight. The way I remember it is that we were just walking on a dirt path and talking to each other when this creature kind of leaped out at us to say boo. If it was trying to scare us, it worked, as we screamed like little girls. I'm not certain if that was its plan, though, because it seemed a bit taken aback by our loud shouts of fear. My brother and I held on to each other and backed a few steps back quickly, keeping our eyes on that thing the entire time. I was looking at its legs and trying to imagine us outrunning them. I couldn't do it. The thing had massive kangaroo kinds of legs, sort of. Not exactly like a kangaroo, but I don't know what else to compare them to, because I can't think of anything else that stands up bipedally with legs like those. I guess you could say they were kind of like the hind legs of a dog, but then again they weren't, because this creature stood up on those legs, so they weren't merely hind legs, they were the legs. Now, even though we both stood maybe 20 or 30 feet from that creature, and even though we both got about the same amount of time to look at the animal, we both have pretty different versions of what happened. That's why when a friend of mine asked me if I thought I was on a reality TV show and that was all a setup, I have to say the only reason I don't think that is because nobody asked me to sign a release form for the use of the footage of me and my brother being scared. So in other words, if a crazy millionaire wanted to hire a bunch of people and create this as an illusion to fool me and my brother, that could definitely have explained what happened about as easily as it being a previously undiscovered cryptid species. So, my brother agrees with me that this thing had a long snout and that it was full of long, scary-looking teeth. After that, though, we agree on very little. I say its eyes shone a golden color, like glow-in-the-dark yellow, kind of, but not greenish, more of a yellow-orange. My brother says that the creature had red, shining eyes. I say it was a furry and dog-headed monster man, and that its fur was largely covered in a green moss, just as though he had been leaning against a tree for 5 years without moving, and that moss had grown all over him. My brother says there was no fur at all, but green, scaly skin instead. If this was some crazy government agency experiment, I'm thinking they got their money's worth. I saw the dogman lean over toward us, and he started barking at us almost like he was firing at us rapid fire, you know? And each bark hit me in the chest like a bass drum or something. My brother says that the lizard man he thought he was seeing roared at us, not barked. In either version, though, that was when we ran. I felt like the world was coming unglued as we were running through the forest. I literally felt like the dirt and grass and trees and sky had all lost their minds, and that any of my next footfalls might be my last. If my brother and I were about to be eaten by a monster in the woods behind the high school's baseball fields, then nothing made sense any longer. I got the sense that the creature had stopped following us before we got back to those fields, but I never lost the feeling that it was still staring at us. We would pause to catch our breath at points, but mainly we tried to keep moving because there was a certainty in my heart, and I think my brother's as well, that the monster thing was still not far away, and it could still come for us if we didn't keep running home. That night, at just a few minutes before 3 a.m., someone threw a little pebble or acorn or something that hit our bedroom window. My brother hadn't gotten his own room yet back then, and we shared that room. I woke up thinking that I had heard something pinging off the glass of the window at least 2 times, but I also wasn't certain that it wasn't just a dream. When it happened a 3rd time, or maybe a 4th, I sat up in bed knowing that this was no dream. My brother, who apparently had started noticing this before I did, bounced out of bed, averting his eyes from the window as though it were the head of the Gorgon Medusa. He reached out and pulled the shade down so that we couldn't see outside. I rolled my eyes like that was going to make it stop. That was sort of like pulling your blanket up over your head as a solution to a problem. Except it worked. The acorns or pebbles or whatever they were stopped hitting the glass, and after a while, we were able to get back to sleep. I didn't make a connection that night between the window incident and the dogman. Fortunately for us, the incident did not repeat itself, and life returned to normal for a while. A week or 2 later, my brother mentioned that it was the same creature we had seen in the forest that was throwing stuff at our window. I asked him if he had seen it, if he had looked out the window, but he admitted that he was too scared to look, that he would have screamed all over again, and we would have both gotten in trouble. He figured that if we couldn't see the monster, and it could no longer look in at us, then it would get bored and go away. I'm glad that he was there to handle that because it never would have occurred to me to do what he did. I'm also glad that he didn't tell me until after the incident had faded a bit into the past, because if I had realized that the thing followed us home and knew where we lived, I would have become completely paranoid and never gotten any sleep again. Since then, neither of us like to go into those woods as we don't want anything following us home ever again. I still say that what we saw was a Georgia dogman, but my brother is convinced that we saw a lizard man. When people ask me what I saw in the woods on that day, most often what I tell them I saw was the werewolf of Willow Bend. Hey, while you guys were watching that last story, look who I found. The pain. The pain. Turns out Bigfoot is some kind of a toothache. It's a jaw ache. It makes it hard to speak, so I can't even do the show. What was that? Oh no, it's that creepy doll again. I thought I got rid of it somehow, but it must have been hiding itself from me.
How smart, Bigfoot. It only took you 3 weeks to solve that mystery.
For those of you who don't know who this is, we introduced this creepy doll and said he could be one of us, one of the creepy, scary storytellers. We had a contest to name him, but then Bigfoot fell mysteriously ill, and the show hardly even appeared for some time afterward.
So what name did you decide to call me?
Well, that was still up in the air last I heard. We initially showed the doll to people we knew, and we got responses from Frank Nora, Checker Phil, PQ Ribber, and others. They suggested we name him Bartleby, Silas, Jasper, Jeremiah, Bakelight McFetus, Dimply, Yonkers Dandy, Winky the Doll, and Creepy. Next, we heard from you guys, our friends out in the public, and you gave us suggestions like Squish Face, that was from Jay Davis. Aldo V said call him Artie. Crosby Woodville came from Alicia Houston. Jesse C. suggested Malachi and Jedediah, since he has that sort of Children of the Corn kind of feel to him. Barbara Smith suggested Mortimer Scream. Standing Bear suggested One-Eyed Joe. Barbara Smith also suggested Mr. McScary, which I really like, and Crutchy, which I also like. Hiram came from, I think that was also by Barbara Smith, I'm not sure. Linda suggests we call him Chucky, which I think might possibly have been used already. If I'm leaving any of you out, it's unintentional and I apologize. Yvonne Marshall on the Lizard in Cornwall, England suggests we call him Yuck. Little Yuck. Oh wait, I can't say that last one on the show. I think Yvonne Marshall on the Lizard in Cornwall is right about that creepy little thing. I think she was right all along. I think he's the reason I got sick.
I won't deny it.
I think he's been forcing me to grind my teeth in my sleep. He's been giving me these terrible headaches. He's been making it painful for me to speak. He's been making it impossible for me to do the show.
Oh, I'm the clever one, I am.
Bigfoot, if this doll carries disease with it, then I think I should throw it out for you. I've got a better idea. I'll kick it with my big foot into that dumpster fire at the edge of town that nobody's figured out how to put out yet.
Fire? Oh no, not fire. Ragdolls and fire don't mix.
Well, you should have thought of that before you made me sick.
It's not an illness per se, Bigfoot. It's more of a curse. Look, instead of cursing you for 13 generations, what if I just curse you for, 13 centuries?
That's it, doll. Get ready to meet your maker.
13 weeks? 13 minutes. Oh, you'll miss me when I'm gone, Bigfoot.
Well, do you feel any better yet, Bigfoot? I feel a little relieved knowing that he's finally gone, but it's gonna take some time for me to physically heal from the injuries. We Bigfoot, we don't heal as quickly as you werewolves do. Well, technically I'm not a werewolf. Oh my god, I don't care what you are. Do you think I'm monstrous or something? Whatever kind of cryptid you are, I consider you my equal. Now, humans I'm very prejudiced against, but I treat all monsters equally. I don't need to see your 23andMe results. You didn't seem to see that doll as our equal. Hey, cursed dolls are not cryptids. Cursed dolls are just little yucks, as Yvonne Marshall on the Lizard in Cornwall says. You should listen to Yvonne, she knows a lot about these kinds of things. Do we have another story we can cut to? I want to go stand perfectly still behind a tree staring at someone for a while until I start to feel normal again. Okay, Biggie, you can go do that. We got you covered with this one final story for today, which we call I Called the Cops on Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I recently moved into a house in rural Pennsylvania that has been nothing but trouble for me. I'm looking to sell it now, so I don't want to say exactly where this is. I know it's wrong not to tell the next owner, but I'm at the edge of my sanity, and my physical health has been slipping drastically due to the unending stress. About 1 or 2 nights per week, someone or something bangs on the outside of my new home. I don't know how else to phrase that. They bang on the house. I don't know why they do it, and I can't even tell what side of the house it's coming from, but it's always loud enough to wake me up. I finally got fed up and called the cops one night. They sent 2 guys around and they searched the grounds but couldn't find anything. About 3 weeks later, I reached my boiling point and called the cops again. This time, when the police walked around the property for me, I heard some kind of a loud situation outside. Sounds of running and shouting. When they came back to my door to talk to me, they seemed rather unhappy. It seems that one of the officers claimed he saw a werewolf. Yeah, he said it looked like a werewolf, but he didn't believe in such things, so he was of the opinion that this was a man in a dog costume, and that I was part of a plot to prank the police. Why he thought that a guy in a furry costume bothering me was working in cahoots with me, I don't know. I was told never to bother them again with my pranks, but I wasn't pranking. This was a very real banging I was hearing. That was a pretty upsetting experience, being scolded by the cop like that for something I didn't even do. I wasn't sure what I should do. It was as though I thought it was something dangerous, a prowler. Then I called the police. They confirmed that it was indeed something dangerous, but far more dangerous than any prowler. Then they yelled at me and left me there to fend for myself. The next time I was awakened by the banging, I remember going into a kind of panic mode. I wanted to see the creature. I needed to see what that cop had seen. I raced out of bed and tripped on my blanket. I ran to my bedroom window and I looked out, but I saw nothing unusual. I ran to the window in the next room and the next, not seeing anything strange anywhere. I was about to go back to bed when the house received another hard knock. Racing out the back door, I finally saw it. There was a man there, a very tall man, and he seemed to have incredibly tall dog ears up on top of his head. He turned toward me, an expression of rage on his German Shepherd-like face. He did seem to be wearing a dog head mask, as the officer had said. I was about to shout at the guy when I noticed his legs. Those were not human legs. Those were animal legs. They were too thin to be the legs of a human wearing a costume, and no human legs ever bent that way. The creature barked at me viciously, and I ran inside the house, up the stairs, and locked myself in the hall closet for a while. That was the scariest thing I had ever seen, and I remained in a state of panic through till about noon that day. Now I'm terrified. What if he comes back? I can't call the police again. They've already put me on the crank call list. My life has become significantly less safe since I called the cops on the dogman.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
Before we get to our stories, I'd like to say thank you to our executive producer, Cheyenne Broomfield. Cheyenne, you know she can. From Japan to Pakistan, she got the plan. She's more well known than Slender Man, and for her phone, she used the family plan. Actually, I don't know what kind of phone plan she has, and it might not even rhyme with Slender Man in any way at all. But we would like to thank Cheyenne Broomfield for her kind contribution, because we literally couldn't do this show anymore without you guys and your help. You don't even know the half of it. So Cheyenne gets the links to over 9 hours of scary, uncensored Dogman stories by clicking the join link under this here video. And now, let's get to what Cheyenne contributed her money for. Today's first story. We do have a 4th of July Dogman story coming up for you, but we're saving that for the end of the program. This first one has to do with an effect that is only rarely associated with Dogman, and that is electrical interference. This is a phenomenon that anyone who saw the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind would be familiar with. Remember when the guy's in the truck and the light shines down on him from above and then things go crazy inside there? Well, I'm talking about that kind of thing. Car engines turning off, batteries draining suddenly. It happens in so-called ghost hauntings and in so-called UFO or alien encounters. Well, at least in this next allegedly true story, it can happen around dogmen as well because Dogman changed the channels on my TV set. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have had a very strange experience on 2 different occasions on my property in upstate New York. I don't want to say the name of my town until I can move out of here, but let's just say that we're a place far better known for our Bigfoot sightings than for Dogman. For this reason, when I first sighted the creature, I in fact thought that Bigfoot was what I was witnessing. The first time was a weekend morning. I remember I was planning on eating breakfast, then going back to bed for a nap before actually beginning the day. I had turned the TV on to have something to distract me as I ate breakfast. I have a rule that I don't want to think about anything that might stress me out while eating. I don't remember what I was watching, but suddenly the channel fuzzed out and was replaced by some news channel. I had left the remote over by the TV since I hadn't been planning on changing channels or watching for very long. I got up and stood in front of the TV, changing the channel back. Almost as soon as I did so, however, the TV fuzzed out and returned to that news channel. This second time, I was standing near one of the house windows, and I caught sight of something outside the window in the woods past my yard. I thought it was a bear. Then, with a flash of adrenaline, I realized it might be Bigfoot. It was far enough away and standing in the shadow so that even though it was a bright morning, I was not 100% certain of what I was seeing. I remember getting goosebumps and shivers as it dawned on me that this might be a space alien or it might be military, since whatever it was doing was somehow changing the channel on my television set. I remember hearing about Bigfoot flying UFOs, and you can laugh all you want, but if you saw something tall standing outside your window while the channels changed on your TV, you'd start believing in space Bigfoot too, at least in that frightening moment. Like, if you ever see any of those reality scary shows, in that moment, those people believe in Bigfoot or aliens or whatever the TV producers have cooked up for them. That was me in that moment. I absolutely believed in everything. My critical abilities had entirely shut down, and I was like a small child, completely accepting of whatever the multiverse seemed to be throwing at me. And at that moment, it was throwing a very tall brown bipedal creature lurking in the nearby woods that seemed to have something to do with my cable TV flipping channels on me. I needed to figure out what that was out there. I don't own binoculars, so I got my cell phone camera and I tried to zoom in all the way to see the creature better. When I would do so, however, I would not see the outline or the shadow of it on the screen in the same place that I could see it with my naked eye. I had been wanting to take some photos and enlarge them to see more clearly what that was, but I would never see it anymore once I looked onto the digital screen. I somehow felt that the animal was both changing my TV channels and making himself invisible to my phone. But what if it really wasn't there and that's why my camera couldn't record it? What if my eyes weren't seeing it but my mind was? What if I only thought I was seeing that creature? I put my channel back to what I wanted, and then I swore I saw that creature move just as the channel changed back. Assuming it was the creature doing this, he kept changing it to a mainstream news channel that I never liked to watch personally. I don't want to name the network since that's not really the point, I don't think. Also, I don't want people thinking I'm telling this story either to promote or to denigrate a particular channel. The point is that I kept putting the channel on that I wanted to watch, and it kept changing to this particular news channel during the period when the creature was visible outside. I suppose I should have made note of what was being talked about on the channel, although I don't know if that's related or not. One way of looking at it would be that I was being shown the channel because there was a message for me in what was being said. Another way of looking at it would be that the electromagnetic activity surrounding the cryptid creature caused the channel to change, but that it was a random thing and not a conscious act by the entity. Now, the second time this happened to me was at night, and ironically I got a much better view of the creature this time. What happened was, I was up late watching an old movie that I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and I kept thinking I was seeing fireflies outside. When I would glance over, though, they weren't there any longer. Then, at some point, I guess during a commercial, I stared outside for a while into the darkness. After a minute, my eyes started to adjust to the dark, and I was positive I saw eye shine in the forest. The fireflies I thought I'd been seeing must have been this eye shine. So I lowered the lights in my room, and I couldn't see it any longer. I figured it must have been the light from the room which was illuminating those eyes, so I put them back up to full brightness. Then I hid between the curtain and the window, standing in the darkness with my hands on either side of my eyes, blocking out the rest of the room light. Not only did I see the eye shine again, but I clearly saw the silhouette of what those eyes belonged to. It was a very, very tall humanoid, but not a human. What I mean is, it was standing on two legs, and it was furry all over. No, it was not a Bigfoot. It had tall, pointed ears on top. Not cat ears, but dog ears. Or canine at least. This was some kind of upright walking wolf or dog. I watched it for what felt like 45 seconds or a minute as it walked back deeper into the woods, occasionally looking back over its shoulder at me. The entire time, I was frozen to my spot in horror, but I kept thinking that this must be the thing that I saw in the morning that time. This must be the creature that changed my TV channel. And after it was gone from sight, I came out from behind that curtain, and I went to turn off the TV so that I could go to bed. In the split second before doing so, though, I noticed that the TV was no longer playing my old movie. Now it was playing that news channel again. Either Dogman works for the Nielsen ratings people, or else that is not a natural animal that I saw, because on two different occasions, Dogman changed the channels on my TV set. Don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back with our special 4th of July Dogman story right after this important word from PQ Ribber.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804 LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
Dogman canceled our 4th of July celebration. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This is the story about the last 4th of July I got to spend with my father back 22 years ago this month. We had packed some skyrockets, flying fish, aerial repeaters, poppers and parachutes into a big bag, and we headed off to this big clearing we knew about in the middle of the forest. We were set to have ourselves a patriotic Independence Day, and we were very excited and happy. At least I remember that I was. But before you lecture me about safety protocols and how it's bad to do this or that in the middle of the forest, don't worry. We didn't get to do anything fun that day because Dogman canceled our 4th of July celebration. Located about 100 miles north of Philadelphia, there exists Big Pocono State Park in Tannersville, PA. There are all sorts of easy-to-hike areas there, and even a restaurant you can walk up to, that shows you a 360-degree view of everything below. But my dad didn't ever have money for that kind of stuff, so we would just sort of sneak off into the woods there to the east of the restaurant and go camping in the forest there. I have no idea if it's kosher to do that there or not, but that's what we would do, and some of my best memories come from that forest. This story would not really go in that category, unfortunately. The best thing about this trip into the woods was that we both got out. I guess I just gave you a spoiler, but it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that I lived. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here telling you this story. Now, the entire day was weird. It wasn't like everything was normal and then Dogman was there. No, things seemed odd and off, at least as soon as we showed up to the place. I remember we hiked a little while into the woods, and I wanted to sit under a tree for a few minutes before we made the rest of our trip. Almost as soon as we sat down, both of our hands got covered in these very small ants. I remember they were tiny and they were tan-colored, and they tickled, but they didn't really go above my wrist and they didn't bite or anything. Dad was brushing his off while I was still seated on a big old tree root, staring at the little bugs crawling all over my hand. My father had to shout at me to get up before I got swarmed with them, but they only went on my hands and no place else. When we finally got to the clearing, my father looked around on the ground for some time before setting up our camp. I remember asking him if he was looking for more ants, but he just grouched at me and told me to collect wood for the fire. It was just beginning to turn into night as Dad got our tent set up and started working on the campfire. I was off about 10 or 15 feet away from him, looking at all the different colors in the increasingly darkening sky. At first I thought it was some kind of explosion, but I quickly realized it was the sound of a large tree trunk being cracked in half. I could see exactly which tree it was, too. A bunch of birds flew up out of it as the leaves shook after the thunder-like cracking noise it had made shocked all of us. The tree, which was 2 or 3 back from the edge of the canopy, settled into place for a second or two, held there by the trees closely surrounding it on all sides. But the illusion that it would be able to stay where it was didn't last, and I saw the tree top kind of slide down into the forest below. And as my eyes followed it down, I heard a sound that scared me more than the cracking of the tree trunk had. I heard the pained, howling sound of an upright walking canid, a particularly tall one. I saw what was issuing the cry as it finished, frantically pacing back and forth, obviously in deep distress over the camp that we were just finishing setting up. I screamed to my father, who screamed to me at the same time. I remember him grabbing me, and I remember being carried through the woods. The dog looked insane to me, just out of its mind, yet the panicked behavior it exhibited betrayed its own fear. It was scared, too. I felt like we were being herded, that it was moving us out of its turf or hunting ground. Then again, if it were hunting us, it could be herding us to where others of its kind might be waiting to ambush us. We might be being led right into a trap. It was hard to see what was happening most of the time I was being carried, but I did occasionally get good looks at the creature. I probably got to see it better than my father had, really. This was something that might have once been beautiful, but then again, maybe it was always horrible to look at. This dogman was all bitten up with fleas or something, I don't know. I'm also not sure it was right in the head, the way it seemed to be acting so panicky all the time. After all, it was at least 8 feet tall. It was taller than any man I've ever seen in my life, even to this day. I mean, where this thing's chest was, that's where a man's head would normally be. And then he just kept on going up and up and up, with a long neck and this ravaged-looking wolf-like head way up there on top. It had long arms that were more like a man's arms than any animal's arms, but still were different from human beings, too. The arms ended in these small, clawed hands. When I say small, I only mean proportionally when compared to human beings. I suppose that when compared to dog paws, they were proportionally very large. The body looked strong and sinewy. It looked fast, and it was clearly strong as it had introduced itself by cracking a middle-sized tree trunk in half. At the same time, though, it looked sick and malnourished somehow. Its fur wasn't consistent all over, and it seemed to have a rash or sores or something in some places. It was not the beautiful and mysterious cryptid dogman that I hear other people talk about. This was something sick and wrong, and it looked like it couldn't make up its mind about what it should be doing there. It snarled at us, then it whimpered. It looked furious, then it looked timid and it whined. In stories and in movies, villains are villains and good guys are good. Sometimes they'll toss in an anti-hero here or there, but for the most part, the characters are self-assured and know who they are and what to do, far more than most real people. After all, if you work too many scenes of indecision into a movie, it'll end up 10 hours long. You've got to condense a lot to fit an entire long story in just 2 hours, so the bad guy does bad stuff and the good guy does good stuff, and the story's a lot easier to follow than real life can usually be. That dogman was the first real life villain I ever met. He was not like a supervillain at all. Well, actually he was, but he wasn't sure of himself. He was as scared as I was to be involved in this drama. He seemed frightened about the idea of attacking us, but he seemed to think he needed to at least chase us. He was so upset that we were there, I thought he was going to pass out at points. We got to the car, and I was crying, because it was not very comfortable to be carried through the forest the way I had been. We started driving, and my father told me to keep watch out for the dogman, which I did. I don't remember seeing him again as we drove away, though. After I realized we had left all the fireworks back at the camp, I cried all over again. We went unannounced to stay over at my Uncle Louie's place. That was a thing you could do back a long time ago. He was just starting to set off his collection, and he gave me a sparkler to stop me from crying. I remember watching fireworks with my cousins, and it turned out to be an okay 4th of July in the end. But it would have been a spectacular one, if not for the fact that Dogman canceled our 4th of July celebration. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.